Okay, good afternoon everyone and welcome to this hybrid meeting of the Scrutiny and Audit Committee. I would remind all attendees that this meeting is being recorded and webcast live on the Council's YouTube channel. I have agreed the attendance of some members remotely, although I don't see any at this point in time, and would remind all remote attendees to mute their microphones when not speaking. For any members of the public watching, please note that all the public committee reports, including details of specific recommendations, are available on the Council's website. Thank you. Mrs Mackenzie, do we have any apologies or substitutions, please?
Thank you, Convener. We have no apologies or substitutions.
Okay, so that takes us to item 2, which is declarations of interest and statements of transparency. And I believe, Mrs Mackenzie, you have one to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Whilst I'm not involved in the decision making, I am making a statement of transparency in relation to item 10 due to knowing people involved within this item, and I will leave the meeting for items 10 and 9.
Thank you very much. Agenda item number 3 is the minutes of the previous meeting, submitted for approval as a correct record the meeting of this committee of the 4th of March 2025. Do we agree these minutes? Thank you. Members, exclusion of public and press, agenda item number 4. We are asked to note that the public and press will be excluded from the meeting during consideration of item 10, so as to avoid disclosing confidential information in terms of section 50A2 and 3B to the Local Government Scotland Act 1973. Do we agree to note that? Thank you. And the first item of business, a scrutiny item, Treasury Management Strategy Statement 2025-26. And it's a report by our Director of Finance. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener, and good afternoon, members. This report sets out the Treasury Management strategy for the Council for what is now the current financial year, 25-26. The strategy covers the proposed approach to borrowing to fund the capital budget that was agreed back in February, and in terms of our managing our Treasury cash flows. As I've said before, this is one of the more technical areas of business for the Council, but I hope the training, I think the last set of training on Treasury Management was in December last year when we looked at the investment approach. So I hope that training that's been provided and the briefings that have been done have been useful and make the report before you today a bit more understandable. The strategy is really about doing 4 things, about setting out how we'll manage cash flows, how we'll borrow the funds needed to undertake the capital programme, to generate income on our surplus cash and the investment of that surplus cash. That remains a really important part of our Treasury activity, and of course managing all the risks that go along with that. Now, this report has already been to full Council, but it is appropriate and necessary that it comes to this committee for an opportunity for review and scrutiny. Just a couple of things to say in terms of the main features of the strategy. It revolves pretty much all around what we think will happen with interest rates. That influences when we might choose to borrow and for how long, and how long we might choose to invest any surplus cash that's available. As you can imagine, it's quite difficult. The economics of the world are quite volatile at the moment, and events well beyond our control and policy decisions that are being made elsewhere. So it remains tricky to judge those things, but we have experience and advisors that can help us with that. I suppose the only other couple of things to mention in terms of borrowing, Table 1, which is on page 12 of the paper, sets out the Council's current debt position and our projected future borrowing requirements. You'll see from that table that we do still have a significant amount of new borrowing to do over the next few years. We are continuing to delay new borrowing to the scale that we require on the basis that we expect interest rates to continue to fall. Now, they probably haven't fallen as quickly as we might have expected, but the latest economic data from, I think it was just last week, around inflation and economic growth has been more positive. And so some of the economic commentators are now talking about a potential 2 or 3 rate cuts over the remainder of the year. So we'll just need to see how that plays out. But our strategy of delaying borrowing until rates fall remains the plan over the course of 25-26. Finally, we are targeting a rate of return on the investment of our surplus cash of 4.35% for the year. We think that will yield an income of around 1.4 million, which is roughly about 2% increase on council tax, the equivalent of that. So it's still a significant amount of money, and we'll do our best to try and outperform that. As always, Convener, happy to try and answer any questions that the committee may have on this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Lorimer. Any questions from members? Councillor Bell, thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Thanks, Ian. I just wanted to pick up on the ethical investing section in the appendix, if that's okay. I know I've raised this before, and you've explained that you and your peers are well cited on this at a national level. It says the framework is still developing. I wondered if you had any timeline on progress on that for it coming back to constituent local authorities, please. Thanks.
Thank you. Is my mic on? Yes. Yeah. Thanks, Councillor Bell. Yeah, no, to some extent, we are reliant on the market coming forward with those options that we could choose to use. But it is something we continue to pay attention to. All of our investments, I suppose, I would regard them as fairly, choosing my word, fairly boring in a way, in that they're very safe, very creditworthy. You know, not investing in armaments and all of those type of things. So what we do is very much focused on, you know, the security, liquidity, yield that we're required to do under the Treasury Management Code. And those priorities still take priority over the ethical side of investing. But it is something we continue to monitor. But there isn't a timeline I can give, unfortunately, on it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No comments? Okay, well, as Mr Lorimer intimated, this has already been to the Council in March, and our recommendation is at 3.2. Is this report agreed? Thank you very much. Okay, members, item number 6 is the Corporate Risk Register and Risk Management Update, and again it's from our Director of Finance, Mr Lorimer. Thank you.
Thank you again, Convener. Yes, this report provides an update on the Council's Corporate Risk Register following a detailed review that was undertaken by the corporate leadership team. The report also provides an update on progress with the actions from an internal audit of risk management undertaken last year. We are not where we need to be on risk management at the moment, and I think that's probably clear from the report. Progress in addressing the audit actions and developing the new corporate risk register have been much slower than we would have wanted. As is outlined in the report, that progress has been hindered, been impacted by limited resources in what is quite a specialist area. Staff absences have impacted on it. For me personally, having picked this up as a new responsibility last summer following the resignation of the former manager, it's been difficult for me to give this the due attention, particularly given the work on Carnoustie Golf, which took up a fair chunk of last year. I don't want that to come across as excuses. I'm just saying that there have been reasons why we're not where we need to be. That has meant that there's been no update on the corporate risk register that's been provided to the Scrutiny and Audit Committee since January of 2024. Albeit risk owners have, as you'll see from the report, have continued to monitor those risks and deliver the agreed actions. The actions from the audit, they're all still to be completed, and a number of them have had to have their completion dates pushed back. So as I say, we're not where we need to be at the moment. However, the good news is that we're now making good progress. The corporate risk register has been fully updated and is included in the report before the committee today. And in relation to the audit actions, I expect to have all of those complete by the end of June this year, and we'll bring a further update to the committee to confirm that that's the case. So it's taken us longer to get to where we need to be, but I'm confident that where we are now is nearing conclusion of that work. There is a lot of detail in the report, particularly around in Appendix 2, which is the detailed risk register, but I hope that the detail in there provides the committee with some assurance about completed actions, the progress of ongoing actions and the further planned actions. Just two final points to mention by way of introduction. Firstly, thanks to those elected members of the committee who attended the risk appetite workshop earlier this month. I have a meeting later this week, actually, with our colleagues from Zurich to look at the outputs from that workshop. And as agreed at the workshop, that will be the results of that will be shared with the attendees for comments before being finalised, and it will actually come back to this committee as well. And secondly, as a final point, the presentation of our risk dashboard and our risk register might change a bit in light of that work on risk appetite that we've done. So you might see the next version of the risk register looking a little bit different than what it does at the moment. But we'll bring all of that back in the next update. So as I said, not where I would have wanted this to be, but I think I'm pretty confident in terms of where we're likely to move to over the next couple of months to get those various actions completed, Convener. Again, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr Lorimer. Councillor Bell, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Ian. I appreciate the capacity challenges at the minute. I'm looking at Corporate Risk 009 on page 62, the climate change and the impact of emergencies. There's a row around elected member updates, but as we know from the budget consultation process, there's a bit of a disconnect between the public understanding around climate impact and what we are needing to spend our resources on. And I just wondered if, and I think this came up at the workshop as well, actually, if communicating and engaging with our public needs to be incorporated into that risk. Because I think we really need to take people along with us on that. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. So you can do that. Thanks, Councillor Bell. Yeah, I think that's a good point. We can take that on as an action in terms of how we make the connections between the need to mitigate climate impact and take mitigation measures, I suppose, to deal with the impacts that are already here. So yeah, happy to take that on as an additional action around the communications for that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Councillor Proctor.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you as well, Ian. I know how hard you work at these things. I mean, you said you're sort of having to play catch up and you're taking on another sort of task there. Have you got sufficient resources to actually do that, or do you feel you need more?
Yes, I think so. We're actually looking at some other options to give us a bit more resilience in this particular area. It's very specialised. It's a very, very small team, and that's been a challenge for us since the departure of the former manager. But we're looking at a couple of options. I've got a meeting in the diary for next week to look at how we can work with partner organisations to give us a bit more resilience on that. But yeah, I'm fairly confident. Always good to have a bit more resource, but I'm fairly confident in terms of where we are now that we'll get the work done that needs to be done now. That'll put us in a better place to then, I guess, manage it and monitor it on an ongoing basis. So, yeah, it's been a challenge, but I think we're on the right side of completing that now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both. Councillor Gall, thank you.
Thanks, Convener. Mr Lorimer, it was obviously looking at financial sustainability, the 0001. We obviously all know that over the last 13 odd years there's been a huge amount of saved, but I'm conscious that you're still citing that we're 32 million or so short up until 27-28. We recently had a budget that needed millions to balance it. When's the trigger, or when do we get to a point where we're not able to even meet our statutory requirements, given that £32 million in such a short period, when we've exhausted so many options, seems a huge hill to climb?
Thanks, Councillor Gall. Yeah, there remains a challenge. It's the #1 risk on the list. It's the highest scoring risk as well. This is, I guess, it's well trailed in terms of the financial challenges. That 32 million includes, pretty sure that includes the current financial year, and we've solved the funding gap. I think it was 11.7 million so we've solved the first third of that, or slightly more than a third of that 32 million. Which I suppose is the good news. And the 3-year budget that Council agreed back in February was taking us quite far towards, closing the whole of that gap. But it remains extremely difficult. We make comment in the likelihood section here about the challenges around that, and the risk is that we'll get to a point where there isn't enough money to fulfil those statutory duties. We're not there, but with each passing budget, if the position doesn't improve in terms of the overall funding available, that risk gets higher and higher. And our job as officers and working with members is to try and manage that risk and make choices. Sometimes those choices wouldn't be the choices we would ideally want to make, but make choices around how best to manage those risks and prioritise the resources that we do have in order to provide the best services with the resources we have. So I don't know if that answers the question. It's a very difficult area to be certain on. What we're flagging in this report is the risk remains very high.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Questions? No? Comments? Councillor Devine, thank you.
Thanks, Convener. I'd just like to go back to what Councillor Bell was talking about in terms of communication. I was at South Esk Catchment Partnership meeting this morning in Brechin, and that was communication was very high on their agenda too. They are very well aware of how much they're doing, but are not communicating necessarily to the wider public. And so there may be an opportunity to be discussing that communication with them. Kellyanne.
Anyone else? No? Okay, we have 2 recommendations then. Is this report agreed? Thank you very much. Agenda item number 7 is the Annual Internal Audit Plan 2025-26, and it's a report by Mrs Wiley. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. This is the annual plan for 2025-26, as you say. The plan has been put together in the same way as it has been in previous years. We look at risk, we look at the work that we've done previously, work that's been undertaken by the counter fraud team. We talk to a number of people within the organisation, and we also consider information from outside the organisation so that we can set it into the context that the council is working within. And we come up with a risk-based audit plan for next year, which is what's in front of you now today. I don't really have a huge amount more to say in terms of that. I'm happy to talk about how we get to that in more detail if you want me to, but otherwise I'm happy just to answer any queries that you have about the plan.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions to Mrs Wiley? Councillor Devine, thank you.
Thanks, Convener. Cathy, on page 80, there's the risk assessment model, and there's a few bullet points there. Am I right in thinking that these are being superseded by the risk areas on page 39 in the previous report, where there's more areas of risk being looked at?
Sorry, just let me get to the right page.
I may have got this completely wrong, of course.
So, sorry, which set of bullet points is it you're referring to here? My page 80 has 3 sets of bullet points on it. Is it the first or the second or the third?
Under the risk assessment model, each of the risk assessed areas within the universe is then allocated to a headline area as follows.
Yes, these headlines, sorry, there's a bit of echo there. these are the headings that we use within the plan. So we've got corporate governance audits, financial governance audits, and information technology governance, and we would fit the risk register risks under each of these headings depending on what there was there. You'll see within the actual plan itself, sorry, I'll see if I can get to the page that would explain it more succinctly than I'm doing at the moment. If you look at, I think it's page 85, you'll see under the table it's got a financial governance heading, and then the data analysis, payroll and accounts payable in terms of the council's risk register is under risk number 1. And then the next one, which is about grant funding, covers risks numbers 1 and 5 from the corporate risk register. And as you go through that table, these headings that are in that risk model appear, and then it's cross-referenced to the individual risks. Does that explain how that works?
Yes, I think that's fine. Thanks for the clarification.
Thanks.
Any further questions? No? Comments? No comments? Well, we've got 2 recommendations. Is this report agreed? Thank you very much. Members will now go to agenda item number 8, the Internal Audit Strategy and Mandate and Charter. And again, it's a report by Mrs. Wiley. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. There's always been a charter that Internal Audit has worked with, and which has been there for everyone within the council in terms of explaining how the whole interaction with internal audit should work and how the governance of internal audit should work. But the new internal audit standards that came in on the 1st of April have meant that we've had to revisit the charter. Most of the charter changes have actually been about language and maybe a couple of extra bits that we've added in there just to make sure that we're fully complying with what the standards want included there. But the new part in that document is the mandate, which comes from the local authority accounting regulations from 2014, which say that local authorities must have an internal audit service which complies with the prescribed standards, and these standards are these global internal audit standards as applicable in the UK public sector. So the mandate section, therefore, within the mandate and charter really just comes from the regulations, although we do have the opportunity to increase that mandate if we want to. The other document that you have here is the strategy. The information in there is not all new. Some of that information has been presented in the past, either as part of the plan or sometimes in the annual report that I produce in June each year. But the standards require that we have a strategy, which is really about explaining what we're doing and how we're going to make sure that we have a service that will be able to deliver what the mandate is requiring us to deliver, and to the requirements of the governance arrangements that are outlined within the charter. So the strategy that I'm presenting here today has pulled that information together, and also it has a high-level plan in terms of the areas that we want to make improvements on in the next short term until June next year, and then thereafter to make sure that we remain as efficient and effective as we can as an internal audit service. Again, happy to answer any questions that you have on these.
Thank you, Mrs. Wiley. Any questions for Mrs. Wiley? Councillor Bell, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Cathy. Again, lots of work in here, and I just want to pick up on, I guess, capacity. I'm looking at page 95 in the table, linking the collaboration between Angus Council and Dundee City Council, and the previous row in that table around the tensions between full compliance and general compliance, where resources make full compliance unreasonable. I just wonder if you could tell us a bit about how you manage that, and do you get the support that you need in the decision-making process? to allow you to be clear on the priorities within those parameters, please. Thank you.
So I'll answer those questions in back to front order, if that's okay. I do get good support both from the management team within Angus Council, but also within Dundee City Council when it comes to that collaboration. In terms of how I manage the tensions there, in terms of the standards, we only need to be generally compliant, but obviously the preference would be to be fully compliant with good practice. But there are some elements within the standards where they recognise that it's not really reasonable to expect an audit service that's the size of ours to be fully compliant with everything. The global standards are applicable across the world for any internal audit service, regardless of the size that it is. And obviously, when we've got a service that only has 4 people in the team, it makes it very difficult for us to be fully compliant with every last aspect, particularly when it comes down to some of the planning requirements around the strategy and resources and what have you. So from my perspective, I'm balancing that by looking at what is an absolute essential in terms of making sure that we are doing an audit that is actually going to present the right kinds of information and do the audit. I'm going to use the word properly, although I know you could interpret that in other ways, but it's really just that balance to make sure that we're concentrating on the operational things that make sure we do the audit well, and maybe not doing some of the other stuff that sits behind that in as much detail as the full compliance would require, but with enough compliance to make sure that it's helping us to be efficient. Does that answer the question?
Thanks, that's been helpful. I'm just concerned about your well-being in the middle of all of that as well, but thank you for a very full answer.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No comments? No comments. Okay, we have 2 recommendations. Is this report agreed? Thank you very much. Now, members, what we're going to do now, if you agree, is we're going to take item 10 before item 9. Is that agreed? Thank you. And I think Mrs Mackenzie will now stop the live stream. Thank you.
John, can we stop the live stream, please?
Please can you put over the microphone if it's started, as I don't have access to Liz's laptop. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. The final item is agenda item number 9, and it's the internal audit activity update. And again, it's a report by Mrs. Wiley. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. This report has the update on where we are with the plan in terms of progress against the plan that was agreed last year. It also has an update in terms of the actions that have been agreed for internal audit and counter fraud reports and where we are with progress in implementing them. I've also included here as an appendix, appendix 3, sorry, excuse me, my high level plan for making sure that we're compliant with the new internal audit standards. This is a high level plan and we have some more detailed plans that sit behind that, but I thought it was important for you to see the things that we need to put in place and the progress that we've made so far. We won't be able to be fully compliant with the new standards until a year from now or just after a year from now, because some of the requirements are for the annual report, which I'll produce in a year's time. So we won't be able to be fully compliant until that's been done, which is why some of the dates are at June 2026. But we've done a gap analysis and we do have that plan in place, and the mandate and charter and the strategy that we talked about earlier are part of the implementation of making sure that we are compliant with the new standards. The other thing that I've included here is the annual report from the Scottish Local Authority Chief Internal Auditors Group. I just felt it was important for you to see the amount of work that goes on within that group. It's a really, really useful peer support group for me as the Chief Internal Auditor, but it's also important for information that we can share with the rest of the team and some training information that's able to be shared. So I just felt it was important that you should see that. In terms of the actual reports that we're having today, we've got the payroll continuous auditing, payroll overtime payments, purchase ledger invoice processing and authorisation from the Housing Northgate system, and the waste service overpayments that we've just discussed in the private session. So if I go down, sorry. Just to say, in the table around the whole of the plan, we do have a few items where we've identified that it'll probably be September before we're able to report them. I think we'll have some work done on them by the time we come to June, but we won't have fully reported them. But I will be able to take the work that's been done at that point into consideration when I'm producing my annual opinion. And there will be sufficient work completed for me to be able to deliver that opinion without any difficulty. So if I move on then really to the continuous auditing payroll work, there weren't any issues identified relating to the duplicate or missing NI numbers. We did identify one issue in the top 10 payments when we looked at that, where there had been an error in submitting a return to work date, which required a refund to an employee in respect of the previous month. All the other testing around that was satisfactory. The next item is a piece of work that was undertaken looking at overtime payments between September 23 and March 2024, where we reviewed time claims, which were the 10 highest from each of the months that we'd looked at. And that covered 21.7% of the value of the overtime paid in the period. And just to put that into context, the payments of salaries in the months of September 23 and March 24 were around £9 million. The overtime paid was just over 400,000, and we looked at almost £92,000 worth of that overtime payments. But what we found was that 26 of the 70 claims, which was 37% of the ones we checked, contained errors that had not previously been identified. And the reasons for these errors varied between a mix of forms being completed incorrectly, payments being approved that were not in line with the agreed policies, and processing errors. So a number of these have already been resolved, and a number of the issues that have given risen to them have also been resolved. So we have 5 actions that are still remaining outstanding, which are due to be completed. 4 of the actions are due to be completed in May this year, and the final one in June. But I think that's something that we've got the director and also staff from that team here that can answer questions. Do you want to go to questions on that now, or do you want me to finish talking about the other report first?
I think we'll take the questions at the end, Mrs. Wiley, if that's okay. Thank you.
Fine, thank you. So the final piece of work that we're reporting was an audit that was looking at procedures in place for purchase ledger processing and authorisation, including the feeder system processes prior to transactions reaching the processing and governance team for payment. And we looked at 4 different areas. We've reported on some of these already, but this report is around the housing Northgate system. And we have comprehensive assurance for this. We do have a couple of recommendations. One is around just making sure that all of the guidance that we were presented with is pulled together in one place and made available to all staff. And the third one was around just making sure that the calculation cells within spreadsheets were locked so that they couldn't be changed by accident. But nothing of any significance other than these 2 things. And the final piece in this report is just the updates in terms of actions that are still outstanding. We've got 7 actions that have gone overdue. We've got 27 with revised action completion dates, and we've got 13 which have not reached their due date yet. So, and we've got 1 counter fraud action which is tied in with one of the other actions to do with the payroll. So that's all I have to say, I think, at this stage. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions, members? Councillor Bell, thank you.
Sorry. Cathy, thanks. I was interested and quite curious about the action on page 129 around ethics training. And I just wondered if that was specific to the global standards, or whether it was more general in terms of, for example, the Nolan principles, and if that is available within the system, such as through COSLA or the improvement service, rather than going externally for that. Thanks.
So the standards are very specific about the fact that we need to have the ethics training, but I think in fairness, we already have that in terms of the Nolan principles, and I think this is because the standards are aimed at every internal audit service and not just at the public sector. We do already have information in induction, but we're also planning the SLACIAG conference, which will be taking place in June this year, is planning to do some training around ethics, which members of the team will be present at that. So I'm hopeful that that will discharge that, if you like, in terms of what we're required to do, but it's certainly something that I'll be keeping an eye on. Where possible, in terms of some of that training that we need to do that's new and prescribed by the standards, we will try and do the training between the teams in Angus and Dundee together, just to try and make sure that we're being as effective as possible there.
Okay, thank you both. Any other questions? Comments? Councillor Proctor.
Thank you, Convener. I'd just like to thank Mrs Wiley and her team, and indeed Mr Lorimer. I think in Angus Council we're very fortunate to have such a professional and diligent team looking after their affairs, and long may it continue, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Proctor. I'm sure we all agree with that comment. We've got 4 recommendations then, members. Is this report agreed? Thank you very much, and that brings us to the conclusion of today's business. So thank you for your attendance and input.
Stop the live stream, please.